Hello, my name's Carmel Capewell, and I'm a lecturer at Oxford Brookes and the co-convener of the Research Methodologies in Education SIG. My co-convener Alison Fox is unable to be here today, but she will be joining us for the event on the 21st of August from 4:30 till 6. I'd like to start off by thanking the BERA team of Marie, Sarah and Dion for actually helping us and supporting us in putting on this event. As the announcer just said, don't forget to keep your tweets coming in, #principles into practice at BERA News. Today I'd like to welcome Claire Tyson, who's going to be our keynote, and she is from Homewood School. She is a teacher researcher, and we were talking the other day via email, and she was saying she's not sure whether she's a teacher or a researcher, and that's the dynamic that she's working with. She combines science teaching and research. She did her PhD in clinical pharmacology at Queen Mary's University of London. And this research is about a mixed methods approach, investigating the impact of interventions on educational outcomes and school culture. She sees it as developing research capacity within staffs and students. And as part of that, she had a student researcher who did part of this project as part of a Duke of Edinburgh Award. I think that's something that we can all learn from. So it's helping with evidence-informed practice, which I think is something that, unlike in other fields, perhaps we don't do enough of in education. The ethics of researcher is really, really important, and I think that is even more so when you are both researching and working in the same environment. So the focus of today's talk is about a project known as the Aspirations game. And with no more to do, I'd like to hand over to Claire and welcome her to this presentation. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Carmel. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, because I've got the headphones in. So thank you for that lovely introduction that really summarised it all beautifully. I've been a teacher researcher at Homewood School, or a teacher at least for 11 years, and a teacher researcher for about 6 years. And we are based in Kent. And I think on the next slide, there is some context about the school. If I could have the next slide, please. We used qualitative research for this particular project that I'm going to talk about today. And the final outcome of the game of the project was a board game that was co-created with a student, and really it was because we'd highlighted the conflict between popularity and success, and this presentation is the story of how we got to that point. So if I could have the next slide, please, Marie. So Homewood Secondary School is the largest secondary academy in the southeast. It's a multi-academy trust with 2 primary schools as well. More than 2,000 pupils. It's very much an inclusive school in a county that has a high number of grammar schools and private schools. So it has a very strong ethos, our learning, belonging, respect motto. So, as I said, we are a very mixed school because we take in children from both rural and urban areas. We're also a refugee-friendly school and a huge SEND inclusivity ethos as well. Thank you. That was that slide. So this all started really with our most recent Ofsted preparation for Ofsted and Ofsted inspection, and it was very much highlighted that boys and SEND students do not make as much progress as we would wish them to, or as they should do. And we did look at the profiles of these students, and many of the most vulnerable students actually belong to more than one of these categories at the same time. So as part of the whole school response to this, I was asked to look at how we might use the research role within the school to support improving the outcomes for these students and ultimately improving their data. Thank you. So we obviously start with some discussions. I work very closely with the strategy team and present regularly to governors, and that's a very important part of making the researcher role visible in the school. And it became clear that we do hold some assumptions as our starting point, that there was a strong feeling that aspiration was linked to economic and social groupings, that actually if we could somehow make children have higher aspirations, that would lead to higher attainment as a sort of cause and effect. It was felt that children coming into secondary school often have kind of unrealistic career aspirations, purely based on not having enough real information, and that maybe our careers guidance should start much younger than it does currently. And so those were some of the starting points with which I framed my research. Thank you. So after discussions, we came up with 3 questions for me to look in more detail. So could we actually increase attainment by increasing engagement with education? Could you explain the gender gap and the SEND gap that exists by looking at differences in aspiration? And what could we develop as a targeted intervention? And obviously the board game that we developed was not the only outcome for this project, but it's the one I'm reporting on today. Thank you. So we used a mixed methodology, which is something I tend to do anyway in school, very much aware that we're measuring a rose with a ruler. I would never just look at the numbers. I would always want to understand the situation, understand the perspectives, and respect the perspectives of the different people involved. But by starting with the quantitative data, exam results, it gave a very clear focus to the research project. But I'm lucky that my team of leadership actually value both qualitative and quantitative data, and we have a history of doing that already. So there were 4 phases, which are very iterative. There was a lot of feedback, and I think the next slide has that layout on it. So you can see that we started with a sort of review of the literature, not claiming to be systematic, but certainly searching around aspirations, not just the EEF toolkit, but looking at literature as well. And then feeding back the ideas from that to the senior leadership team and using that to inform the survey, which was phase 2. So then in phase 2, we get into the ethics of how are we going to approach the children, and we have to do it through the parents with informed consent. So we're a Google school in terms of we're quite well set up with Google. So I used a Google form. The first part of that form is like a consenting form, and it has information, and it's sent to parents, not students, for them to complete with their students. And we had 187 responses back. And then again, that feedback was given to senior leadership. And we'll be talking about the responses as we move forward today. Then I went back to 3 focus groups of students and interviewed them, recorded them. Again, they've completed a consent form. We understood that their ideas might well end up today, for example, in a conference. And I did a thematic analysis of what I found out. And the questions in phase 2 were really based, in phase 3 were really based around what we had found out in phase 2 and me sort of checking them out with the students and calibrating my ideas. And then those ideas were taken with a student researcher to develop the board game that we could then, because we wanted to give back to the students something for the time and effort and information they'd shared with us. So although it looks linear, there was a lot of feedback going on. So if we go back to phase 1 and look at the literature, when we looked at various papers, and the references are on a slide to follow, there were 5 domains that appeared to have an influence on the aspirations of students. So there was the whole kind of idea of what is motivation, the sense of belonging, friendships and peer groups, mathematical ability, and parental aspirations. So I designed questions around those themes for the students and their parents. to see if we could link up with some of the existing literature. Thank you, Marie. One of the things that came through very strongly and resonated very much with our school, being so inclusive, was that we needed to move away from some kind of preconceived idea of what a high aspiration was, to the idea that all children had worthwhile and diverse aspirations, and actually our job was to support them in finding an appropriate route to achieve interesting and fulfilling careers, jobs, future courses, rather than a sort of preconceived idea, value-based judgment of what we saw as a high aspiration. And I think that helped the whole process feel a lot more ethical as well. Thank you. This is included in the slide. These are some of the papers I looked at, and I particularly like the first one. So we have children from Poland, Turkey, and the Arabic states, and so we did attempt to translate the and share the survey with those families through their dedicated member of staff. We didn't get a great response, but they were included, and I did work with students who were bilingual to make sure that the survey was appropriate. But most of this was shared as a link with students. Sorry, can you just go back to that last bit? Yeah, so in line with that, again, everything is done as an opt-in consent. I'm very much against the idea of opting out, that you have to actively opt out when you are working with children and parents. I think it needs to be an opt-in, so you absolutely know that those parents have agreed to take part or on behalf of that child. Thank you. So here, obviously I'm not going to run through all the responses from all the domains today, but I have picked a selection. So we had 187 parents and their children, and quite a good balance of gender. So 89 boys and 91 girls, and then 7 who didn't state which. We had about 11% SEND students and 10% free school meals, but there was an overlap between those last two categories, so students that fell into both groups. And actually that was a very helpful group for me to be targeting. Thank you. So to get a taste of the questions we asked, you're going to take part yourself, and it would be great if you could answer honestly these questions. So this was one of the first ones. I've obviously changed it from work to work from school as well. Interesting. I wonder if the difference is that when you're at work, the progress might be controlled by somebody else, whereas perhaps when you're at school, it is more autonomous as well. But a bit of an overwhelming yes then. You do not feel you're making enough progress at work. That might well reflect the fact that some roles can feel like a never-ending task. So compared to students, so 85% of SEND students felt they were not making enough progress at school, compared to all the boys, 56%, and all the girls, 70%. So quite a high proportion. So that's something we discussed with the head of SEND, and we've addressed this by setting up an SEND champions group where each department has to contribute a member to the team, and they meet several times a term. And we've also had a big focus on quality first teaching as well, and since this survey came out. And 100% of free school meals pupil premium students said they did not feel they were making enough progress at school, which obviously for us was a very worrying indicator. Thank you. So the next question, are you willing to work some extra weeknights and weekends to get ahead? This is what we asked the children. Obviously a dedicated bunch of. So again, sort of overwhelmingly a yes. We obviously haven't asked you about your gender, but this was something we wanted to try and differentiate between the different groups of students we were looking at. And some people holding to their boundaries there and saying, actually, no, I've worked hard enough as it is. So with the students, what you can see is that girls overwhelmingly were more prepared to work a little bit harder. Free school meals very much were not prepared to put in a few extra hours there. Boys and SEND were roughly similar. So then another question we asked the students, when you achieve one of your goals, do you start moving forward towards the next one on your list? Let's see what you guys say. They're obviously very goal orientated. Interesting. So 89% yes, 11% no. Oh, we're going for 100%. So I don't know. Yeah, 100%. I'm not sure how many ladies we have in the audience today, but it was ladies the girls who were 89% said yes. And again, the free school meals students who perhaps had less awareness of goals or were less familiar. I don't know, we didn't ask that specific question, but were less likely, but not such a big gap as with the extra hours. And again, boys and SEND fairly similar. So we're constantly working with growth mindset with our students. So do you make a conscious effort to learn from your failures and mistakes? Looks like most people, that's a yes. And again, interestingly, our SEND department do a lot of work with growth mindset, and those students were 95% conscious that they can learn and grow from their failures and mistakes. And that was a really super reflection on the hard work of our SEND department. Again, girls more than boys were conscious of that, but again, the free school meal students less so. Thank you. So, do you often read or study subjects of interest to you? I hope that's a big yes from everybody. I mean, reading these days could actually be video, could be blog. Reading perhaps is too narrow, but I think study covers the different possible mediums there. So it looks like 100%. So again, really encouraging SEND, 75% said yes. Girls and boys, very balanced, almost the same, and free school meals just slightly behind again. So a very similar trend in each of these motivational categories, questions. Are you presently using all or most of your abilities and resources to move ahead? That's a more interesting split between the yeses and the nos, actually, because there could be so many factors influencing that. So about an 80-20 split, yes, no. So here we've got quite a narrow spread with certainly the different groups of students, but definitely still. So what we saw here was that boys tend to, and this was something we recognized in school, exaggerate their effort. And boys actually tended to believe they were working harder than they really were. And that was the sort of take-home message from this. And again, I think there was the free school meals lagging slightly behind, and the SEND students possibly reflecting the fact that there's a lot of diversity in key skills, that some of them may have felt they had sort of an untapped potential. And that's why we started to focus on quality first teaching, the key skills and SEND. Thank you. So again, how much effort have you made? Have you tried to work hard in school so you can have a better future? And again, girls believing that they've worked hard, SEND certainly believing they've worked hard, and free school meals believing they've worked hard. So everybody paying lip service sometimes, I think, to the fact that they think they have worked hard, because certainly the results don't necessarily match that. Thank you. This question, I realised afterwards, could have been better framed, because when you talk to students, and this is what came out in the interviews later about long-term goals, it's actually very clear unclear, what you mean by a long-term goal. This certainly needed clarification when we had the focus groups. So what we found was that girls are better able to motivate themselves than boys and free school meal students. But actually, when you talk to them, it becomes clear they all mean very different things by long-term goals. So that was not a this is one of the things you learn as you work with the students. And actually, possibly, I should have involved my student researcher a little bit earlier, and I might have picked up on that. So I learned something there. Thank you. So I would rather take the easy road in life than get ahead. And here the boys absolutely came out top, and girls much happier to have a bit of delayed gratification there. And that was certainly perhaps was one of the things that explained the gender gap that we were seeing in our academic results as well. Thank you. How much do you agree or disagree that nowadays you need qualifications in order to get a job worth having? And boys and girls roughly equally split, free school meals and SEND are roughly about the same. I think what we took from this was that we needed to empower students to set and achieve realistic career pathways, and certainly start integrating career information into things like our science teaching much earlier on than we had previously done. And this is now what we are doing with the new Key Stage 3 scheme of work for Year 9. So I think that's the end of the motivation questions. We'll go quickly through some of these. So the staff at the school make me feel wanted and accepted. A massive difference here, with boys believing that the staff like them, girls needing to be told that the staff liked them and accepted them, and SEND students feeling quite low on that domain. And again, we've had lots of conversations at school about this. Boys and SEND students almost equally committed and feeling supported to the school, girls slightly less so. I mean, I think we need to work on that with form tutors rather than a whole school thing. Thank you. This was gave us pause for thought. I don't have many friends at the school, and the SEND students were more likely to agree with this. So that again made us look at the way we are structuring and integrating SEND students. Thank you. So that's just a selection of the data. We also had feedback from parents, and we looked at maths as a possible filter, a critical filter, and that if you are told you're no good at maths early on, that tends to shut down some of your aspirations and pathways, and there was some evidence for that as well. But for today, we're moving on to phase 3. There were 3 group interviews, and they ranged from Key Stage 3 to Key Stage 5. And we just tried to unpick some of the results of that survey with the students and talk about them and find a little bit more detail. So if we have a look at the first set of results. Next slide, thank you. So with gender differences, both boys and girls felt that girls are better behaved than boys. And there was a lot of codes around confidence and anxiety. Girls being more anxious, more perfectionist, and more insecure about their performance and how well they're liked and accepted, whereas boys actually perceive girls as being more confident and paying more attention. Some boys also said that girls were the reason that the boys like to show off, and that girls can somehow get their work done and then chat, whereas the boys then join in and get into trouble because they haven't done their work. And that came across quite strongly. Thank you. Boys did acknowledge actually that their choices about behaviour resulted in them making less progress, but they actually valued the attention that they got rather than the progress. So we're coming to start to see this popularity versus success theme that we ended up, I think they had much less, they had a sort of avoidance of planning or working for the future, not perhaps whether this links to the sort of teenage neurological brain development possibly as well, that kind of inability to project into the future. But if they liked the subject and they liked the teacher, they were actually prepared to work a bit harder and make it more important. Thank you. I've already talked about this, that goals need to be clearly defined. When you talk to the students about it, they recognised that you can achieve a long-term goal by breaking it down, but actually they really valued the state where they were now. They valued childhood, and they didn't want to look too far into the future. They didn't want, it's sort of almost like a Peter Pan effect. Boys' version of goals was to do with things like extracurricular clubs and activities, and they saw those as being much easier goals to achieve. So success in the football field or success on a musical instrument was important to them, perhaps more so than valuing academic success in the school. Thank you. One thing that was completely unexpected to me, perhaps as a child of the Thatcher era, was that they didn't value financial aspirations. They actually valued happiness, the students I spoke to. Happiness and well-being, friends and family were really important concepts to them. And there were some gender stereotypes being expressed in Year 8, showing, you know, we really do need, in Year 7 and Year 8 actually, about what sort of careers and opportunities were available to them. Again, since this, we have now employed a second careers advisor to support the school. Thank you. This is interesting in the sort of COVID scenario, because SEND students in particular, seeing home and school as separate has become an issue with the homeschooling, that I'm not at school, I don't need to do schoolwork, reflecting some of the neurodiversity of our students and their perhaps lack of, that's how they see life, work and home, school and home. So that was interesting, that they saw them as very separate. Boys actually were perceived to have a lot more hobbies and interests than girls. And I do wonder if, as parents, boys are encouraged to take up physical activities because of their need for movement and energy, perhaps more so than girls, and therefore girls having less time for homework. That's something I'd like to explore a bit more. There was definitely stricter teachers with higher expectations definitely got more homework done, and it was valued as more important. And parents were very divided about homework. Parents expected girls to get on with their homework, but expected to need to remind the boys, and the parents experienced a lot more conflict with boys over their homework than girls, which was interesting. So reading, boys think that girls are keen readers compared to boys, and sometimes there was a sort of extrinsic pressure to read rather than an intrinsic, I want to go and read. Certainly working in the school library, I'd say we see not quite equal numbers, slightly more girls. Thank you. So this, we're starting to move into the idea that success versus popularity. Girls were slightly more willing to work harder in class and look good. Boys wanted to be not to be viewed as clever or working hard, but they might be prepared to work a bit harder if it's an options choice like construction or a subject they've chosen particularly. Some students did show a slightly more mature attitude beyond the stereotypes. And family influences were definitely important predictors of motivation to learn. Thank you. And the thing that came across really strongly talking to the students, which was not in the survey at all, was this idea of students being divided into social groups, which strongly influenced their behaviour. And students could be quite fluid in their membership of different social groups. And what you would see them doing is a sort of power game where they navigated popularity and success by aligning themselves with different groups. So they believed that being in a sporty or popular group would lead to a better, well-paid, high-status group, whereas in reality, it would be the students from what they would call the nerdy group, the STEM subjects, who would in reality lead to many of those long-term outcomes. So whether this is as a result of our celebrity culture, that if you're sporty or popular, you're going to become rich and successful, I don't know. But that was definitely a held belief. Thank you. So some examples of social groups that students felt were prevalent in the school would have been things like what they called educational groups, academic students who are often left out or ignored. Then you've got a very sporty group. Now that can be a very protective group. So if you're more academic, but you're also sporty, that kind of protected you. You've got your video gamers, your cool people, keeping up with the latest trends. The very good looking or attractive students were a separate group. And then there was quite a strong theme around popular students with lots of friends. And I think that was also linked to being kind of cool, to challenge the teacher, and so that other students would want to keep on the right side of you. Thank you. It was really seen that parents had a very important role in supporting positive self-image, particularly perhaps for the more academic students as well. And that the setting standards of behaviour towards others was very much a parental influence, as well as careers and thinking about the future. That often came from discussions they'd had with their parents. Thank you. There was a preference for male teachers, so they felt they had better classroom control, but they also valued female teachers who built long-term relationships with their class or tutor group, so that was also seen as important, that attachment. But it might have been that male teachers were easier to attach to because of kind of shared hobbies and sports and things. Thank you. So we looked at confidence and self-esteem, and that girls possibly had less opportunities to fit in and had more challenges to their self-esteem. And actually one of the messages we took home as the staff was we needed to be perhaps more overt, more explicit, and praise the girls and give them the reassurance that we did not actually realise they needed. And again, a very important role for parents supporting their children. Thank you. What was very nice after the work our school's been doing over the last few years on self-development and growth mindset was this idea that some students could see beyond the stereotypes and acknowledge that it's about individual students. And these were not necessarily the older students saying this, actually they were younger students. So the game. So I had a wonderful student researcher who was doing his Duke of Edinburgh Gold, and he worked with me once a week in my library lunchtime, and he talked me through those results that I've talked through with you, and he felt it was him who developed the popularity versus success idea. And we were told about Head Start Kent, who do funding for student-led projects, and we applied to Head Start Kent to get copies of the board game made, and we initially shared them with tutor groups, but they actually then were sort of taken over by our key skills lessons and tutor groups, which was rather nice. I've talked a lot about other responses the school has made, so I'll move on because I want to show you the game. I believe there are, we'll move on again please, Marie. I believe there are copies of the game available for you to download. It's a simple board game. Dice, you need two counters and a dice. And I wanted to get you guys to pick a number. And there are popularity and success cards. If you land on a red square, we pick up a popularity card. If you land on an orange square, it's a success card. And I can see you've picked a number 3, so I'm going to let you go first. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. That's a yellow, so we need a second number. Oh, it's my go actually. 1. So I start on a red card, and it says, you ignore someone who is being mean to you, move forward 2 places. So I'm now on the same square as you. And it goes like this, it's a turn-taking game. So we're going to go for number 6 is your next number. 1, 2, I'm taking a shortcut here. 3, 4, 5, 6. So you've landed on orange, and your orange is a success card. You are not afraid to take part in class discussion. Move forward 2 places. So I'll move you forward. 1, 2. My go. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've landed on orange, a success card. And this whole game takes about 5–10 minutes. You can play it in a tutor group period or end of a lesson. You are late to period 3 after break. Go back 2 places. Woohoo. 1, 2. Right, we've got a, can't remember if I did 4 or 6 last time. I'm going to go for 4 this time. 1, 2, 3, 4. You're on a yellow, so you don't pick up a card. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for me. Another orange card, success card. I have all my timetable and school equipment with me. Move forward 1 place. So as you can see, the cards are designed to pick out behaviours that would lead to popularity and success in reality. Right, we've got a number 2 there from you guys. 1, 2. You're on orange and you're only 2 squares away from winning. You decide to rise above the latest drama and gossip. Move forward 2 places. So that actually takes you to the final square, which is called respect. So you have won the game as participants. I can just have the screen back and we'll look at some pictures of the game slides. Thank you, Marie. So you can see the board is a simple game. It's a Twinkle template. You can print it out. The rules are on the back, so we just made them. We laminated them. I spent some of the Head Start grant on plastic folders to put them in, and dice and counters and rubber bands, and just keep a stock of those so I can refresh them. You can see we've acknowledged on the back some of the sources. If we go to the next slide, Marie, you can see some of the cards. We've actually got a couple of sets of cards. So these are based on discussions from the students, Head Start Kent resilience resources, and some WikiHow research I did about, I was trying to think, where would a student go to find out about being popular at school or successful at school? So when I talk to the student, it goes, well, you just Google it, don't you? So some of these questions. So you can see that we've tried to incorporate some of the kind of healthy living, positive mindset, common things that children do wrong at school, like not coming with the right equipment, extreme haircuts, you know. So we were trying to do a little bit of emotional intelligence, emotional literacy as well. Thank you. I think if you can move, yeah, this is the second set of cards. So there are perhaps some more focused questions from the Head Start Kent, so you'll see some stuff about mental health in there as well. Thank you. So that's how we developed the game. Quite a journey, took quite a while. And really, I want to say a big old thank you to the staff and students of Homewood School and Head Start Kent for the funding. Alex, my student researcher, my line manager, Paul Hanson, who's Director of Staff Development, obviously Carmel and Alison. Thank you for facilitating today, and for Marie working her magic to make it all happen. And I'll be really interested to hear your questions. Thank you. Oh, and some more references.
Thank you, Claire. That was really, really interesting. I found it really quite helpful. While you were away, I was saying about how important it was that you kept stressing the ethical issues and kind of constantly thinking about those ethics. Could you just briefly tell us a bit more about kind of what was guiding your thinking, or at which points you were prompted about ethics?
Well, I've done quite a bit of thinking and talking with the BERA, with Alison actually. I've been involved in some of the BERA ethical feedback on the new guidelines, wasn't it? And I did a blog. So I think I came from a medical background, so I was very shocked by the lack of ethics when I first set up as a teacher researcher. And it's something that everybody knows, it's my sort of hobby horse at school, and you can't do that and you need to do this. You know, for me it is the first thing I think of, whereas I'll often find it's the last thing. And I think since GDPR came in, the situation's been a lot easier because people now have that awareness. But there are differences. But I would always frame my research design around a balance between what is pragmatic and practical and what is ethical.
Can you give us any examples of that?
Well, I think it's a lot easier to say to a form tutor, today in registration, your tutor group are going to log on and do this survey for me, but that isn't ethical. But I would have got a lot, and this is always the tension, that I would perhaps have a higher number of participants, a bigger sample, but it's coercive. So it's the power balance. And you were quite right in your introduction to say that when you move between roles in a school, and this is something Philip Poulton and I've talked about, you take power from one domain to another, and you have to be very careful.
Yeah. I mean, leading on from that, a question I had was, I'm not sure, and it'd be helpful, that you sent the form home to the student via the parent. Is that right?
Yes, as a Google link. So I had to do group emails or pick target groups and do email. I wanted to make sure I got a good proportion of free school meals, key skills. So I would target with my emailing those specific groups if I hadn't had a response. So I kept a sort of running total. Yeah.
Good old quantitative background.
Yeah.
I'm trained as a psychologist, so
Yeah.
confounding variables and stratified samples, I'm all there with you.
Yeah.
I just wondered, was I correct in saying that the parent and the student completed the questionnaire together?
That was the idea, that you would sit with your child, and some of the questions were for students and some were for parents.
Right.
So I don't know what voice we heard in the end, whether it's what the parents thought the children should have said, or whether the parents just said, oh, you get on and fill it out.
Yeah,
I'm very aware that it's a very imprecise art.
That's why it's an art and not a science.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because that was one of the issues that I was wondering about. You know, to what extent would the students would say what they felt rather than what they knew their parent wanted to hear. Yeah.
Particularly the girls, actually, which might be why the girls come across as harder working and more, because they are more perfectionist and desiring.
Right, okay. And then how did the students choose to be part, or did they choose to be part of the focus group? How did the focus groups come about is my question.
Oh, well, that was a really difficult one, because you're battling with, when is there a crack in the school day in which I can, you know, insert a focus group. So one group were an existing student, Key Stage 3 student council. So they were students who were regularly working together as a team, and a lot of the best insights actually came from that group. So they would be the students who volunteered on open evening, for example. One group was my sixth form tutor group. So that was, again, it was voluntary, but they were a group I'd built a relationship with because I wanted to be able to have an in-depth discussion. And then one group was a group of key skills and dyslexic children who met regularly in the library, who I'd got to know because they worked in the library where I'm based once a week with another teacher. And I took over her slot with them one week. So they represented the views of the key skills as well.
Right, okay. So you led the group, the focus groups?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And then just following on from that, the student researcher, I'd be really interested to know, you said he was doing his Duke of Edinburgh Award, and he clearly got involved in the latter stages of the analysis. Could you tell us a bit more about how he got involved, at what point, and why?
Yeah. So bless him, he got to do some real donkey work as well. Obviously, what I had to do was be very careful about GDPR. So we'd have a situation where I would create a Google document for the 1 hour he was working with me and then remove him from it afterwards. So he did some of the coding and sorting of data into codes, which was good because it gave another voice to that thematic analysis. But he didn't have long-term access to the data. He would only have that access. He did, I'm trying to think, on other projects, he's done things like, you know, stuffing surveys into envelopes. You know, he's kind of done everything. But we took the big problem, and I did correspond with somebody about this. I apologize if they're listening and I don't know their name. I can't remember it off the top of my head, because they do not have a theoretical framework. So any interpretation they give is very literal, which is helpful, but it's then how do you take that if you are also looking at some kind of theoretical framing? It's not so bad with just thematic analysis, but you couldn't do grounded theory, for example. You couldn't elevate it to that next level. But he was a bright young man who got to try, you know, some basic sorting and sifting and reading. And then we had these discussions about, well, what does this really mean? What is the central dilemma? And he obviously represented the group of more academic students. So he could give me that perspective of what it felt to be in those social groups and how he saw the rest of this dynamic of the school. It was a bit sort of ethnographic, I think. Well, that's not my background.
Yeah. Okay, and so who approached whom?
Well, interestingly, his sister was a student researcher when she did her Duke of Edinburgh.
Right.
So there was a family connection. She'd already worked with me. We have a very interesting school within our school called iCollege, which is a student-led learning experience. And they both came from that stable, if you like. So he was already a sort of self-motivated, reflective young man.
Right, okay. Yeah. And then it was part of the Duke of Edinburgh
Yes.
award that he was able to do it.
Okay. I think it might come under their service learning or skill development. I just filled in a form at the end for him to say he'd done a whole range of activities, and actually he'd shown a commitment. That was the big thing, because it was his lunch break every Tuesday. Come up to the library.
Yeah. Did he say anything about his skill development, or?
I think it was all part of the whole journey, and then I think that's been the hard thing this year for students, missing out on that kind of completion of that journey and all the skills they develop when they're with school. And I think for him, I would say it helps with his confidence as well, but he wasn't the type to verbalize what it had meant to him.
Right, okay. And then I was wondering, this is a kind of wandery going on from there, is in terms of the free school meal children. Did you explore, that's been done in other research I've read, about how a lot of children who are in that free school meal category also have other requirements on them outside of school, such as doing either caring responsibilities in lots of different formats and working as well? Was any of that explored, or?
Not in this piece of research, but as a school we are very conscious of it, and we have a young carers support network. Throughout the whole of lockdown, we've been doing extensive training on adverse childhood events and attachment, and I think as a school we're really growing our understanding. One of the benefits that's come from lockdown is we've had very close dialogues with our pastoral team about the context of these learners. So I would have said that when we did that research, possibly we know less than we know now, but it's definitely the direction we're moving in. Oh, we've got some more questions.
All right, thank you. Okay, okay, so Peggy wants to know, and it's kind of voted up, where did you seek ethical approval from?
Well, I use the BERA guidelines. I don't have a university ethics board that oversees me, but I use my head teacher as the final authority. So I prepare an ethics type summary, and I actually run it through our data protection officer as well.
Right, okay. Right, okay. Yeah, rationale for separating out free school meals from boys and girls on the stats.
So on the stats, the free school meals includes boys and girls.
And then it was the overall population that was the boys.
So it was all boys. Oh, hang on, let me get this right. So all boys and all girls was one group, wasn't it? And then a subgroup of that would be free school meal boys and free school meal girls. So you're comparing free school meals to the whole male population.
Right. Okay.
But I don't think they are separated out in the way that they're asking. But the reason is that that is an underperforming group, and that's why we needed to focus on them.
Yeah, in a similar way to that you did with the SEN group.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Yeah, how did the research role at the school come about? How did it start? How was it funded?
So it started when I was doing my doctorate and teaching 3 days a week, probably 4 actually. And I went to the head teacher and said, I'm learning all these amazing skills, and have you heard of teacher researchers? And, you know, I'd love to be your school teacher researcher. And she said, that's lovely, but there's no money. But she's a very, very clever lady, very aware of the teacher research thing. So this is, 6 years ago. So I said, okay, I'll do it for free for the first year. So for the first year, I did a few projects, and we looked at the intervention called Take Up the Challenge. And we looked at how it had improved maths in those children, and that persuaded them. So I was given a kind of opportunity to demonstrate the value of the role, and then I was paid 1 day a week to do it. And then I took over 1 day within the library team, and that paid for the second day.
Right. Okay.
So it is a unique, I think, well, increasingly less so, but at the time probably quite unique opportunity. I was very lucky.
Yeah. Right. Back to the next. And how did you engage the questionnaire? How did you engage the questionnaire participants with the results? For example, were the students and families aware that the game was a result of the questionnaire?
It was shared as a PowerPoint. So I made a PowerPoint, yes, and included the game as a, talked about the game. That PowerPoint was shared by form tutors, and it's made available on the school website on a sort of research blog. And it was, I imagine I would have done a letter home and emailed it. So much has happened since then, but yes, I would absolutely share it with parents. And it would have been sent as a sort of email or link home.
Right. Just before we go to the next question, kind of a sub thing from that is, what's been the response of the students to the game?
Well, it was interesting because I shared it with form tutors, and then it quickly became apparent that form tutors had too many other things to do in tutor time. So I collected it all in, and I started playing it with my Key Skills Year 8 group regularly, and they absolutely loved it. And then the Key Skills, one of the Key Skills post holders took it over and started using it with a wider range of Key Skills students. But one of the outcomes from today would be really great if people can download it and try it with a wide range of students.
Yep,
but
I'm sure they will.
It's a really great way to end a lesson where the children have had enough and they've worked hard. We've got 10 minutes left. It's very easy to give out the envelopes. It takes about 5 minutes to play.
Yeah, as we saw, it's quite quick. Okay, and the last question that we've got is, were any of the assumptions you made at the beginning challenged? And kind of how did you account for having made these assumptions throughout the process?
So the assumptions came from having had discussions with various senior leadership teams, line managers and things, that, you sort of have intuitive ideas about things. And I think those were challenged throughout. The literature review challenged the idea of what is an aspiration. Have we got this right anyway? I think we were surprised to find out that girls felt less confident than they appeared. So that challenged some of our assumptions about who works hard and why. What else was there? Remind me what the other assumption. I don't suppose we can go back and look at the.
Well, I can have a quick look.
The other assumptions.
Where is that? Right towards the beginning.
One of the big ones.
Right. Okay, got it.
If we increase engagement, will we increase attainment? Wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I would say that absolutely our teaching and learning has moved down that pathway in terms of the way we are developing teaching and learning is about increased engagement. And we are, this year's GCSE results would have been a test of the work that has been done. Yeah.
Right. And one of your other assumptions was aspiration is linked to social and economic groupings.
Well, I think you're right to put into context those learners and their scenario before we make that judgment. And I think we've become much more aware of some of the obstacles to attainment that some children face, not necessarily even free school meals. So I think as a school, we've tried to become more sensitive to these things.
Yeah, because one of the groups you said that, I'm just going off the top of my head, a high number of asylum seeker students, is that
refugees
fair?
Refugees. We are a Kent school and we have welcomed them, but it kind of is even not just those groups. I think perhaps it's a crude category to use, and actually we should be viewing children as individuals. I think it's a kind of artifact of the data, isn't it? Of the way that targets have been set politically. I mean, I think I would now probably question a lot more around that.
Okay. And you said students lack realistic career information. Students lack information about realistic career pathways.
Yeah, because they come from primary school wanting to be a vet or a space astronaut or
a professional footballer.
A professional footballer, or you know, and I think the whole journey through school is about discovering more about their potential. And we are, as I said before, definitely building in careers advice throughout Key Stage 3 now about these are exciting options for you, but they're realistic.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the other assumption you had was Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3, students start secondary school with high, perhaps unrealistic aspirations. Yeah. And you talked about including more career advice and taking on more career
taking on an additional person to support that whole Gatsby standards drive that schools now have to have since this been working towards. And we're also rewriting the Key Stage 3 curriculum to include Year 9, and therefore we have an opportunity to make some of the work linked to careers in different fields, which is what we've done since then.
Yeah, okay. Right, I think that was all the questions. I'm just having a peek back at if Marie can let me know. Not at the moment. Okay, so all right, thank you very much, Claire. I think it's really brave of you to share your experience, because it does put you out there to an extent. And you know, it's all about, for a lot of us, it's about this journey and this dynamic. And I'm sure there will be more questions, because this is being recorded and people can watch it on YouTube, whether, you know, if they haven't been able to actually attend live today. So we'll have the opportunity. And I really look forward to welcoming you back again on the 21st of August in the late afternoon, early evening. And I'm sure then the way Alison and I are planning that is to perhaps have some more conversations about different things that have popped up. So yeah, I really look forward to it. I thank you for your time, effort and energy today. And just again, thanking Marie for her technical expertise and help in getting today through and coping with our little glitches. And also to remind everybody that there are static presentations that you can watch. Just go onto the BEER events. It's connected into the Principles and into Practice event. There are some really, really interesting conversations that are to be had there. And we look forward to physically seeing you again on the 21st of August. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.